G20 leaders have pledged $5 trillion to battle the spreading pandemic, calling it their absolute priority to tackle its health, social and economic impacts. During a video conference of the world's major economies, the leaders said they were committed to restoring confidence, preserving financial stability and reviving growth. For more, I'm now joined by former Pentagon advisor and a commander in the US Navy Reserve, Jason Israel. Jason, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Danica. Thanks, as always, for mentioning my Navy Reserve affiliation. As a reminder, as I'm not on duty, these views are my own.
Absolutely. Now, Jason, this was a virtual summit, I guess something that we've really never seen before, but it just really shows that the virus respects no borders right now, and it's a global effort.
That's right. So for starters, as you said, the G20 was a video conference, so it was only about 90 minutes. Now, I know that there are many, many people listening to this that have had video conferences this week that they wouldn't normally have, and I'm sure that some of the social catch-ups have been 90 minutes. So imagine 20 countries with about a dozen heads of state trying to get in their statements within 90 minutes. There really wasn't much except, those basic canned statements of support and the fact that we need to try to come together as a global community to fight the coronavirus. So you saw in the statement, as you mentioned, about $5 trillion committed. And then they also both mentioned that they would try to work together also to support the multilateral institutions such as the World Health Organization, and also try to shore up the global economy as well. So you can actually see the statement that they published very easily to find online, but it's nothing really out of the ordinary. That in contrast to what we've seen and talked about a lot over the last year, Danica, which is the US and China and Russia sort of moving away from multilateralism as an answer to some of the global problems. So what I'd like to say, the bottom line here is that while there is a G20 and it is talking and it is functioning, and hopefully it will be able to improve global coordination, it does not change the fact that there are these underlying dynamics of major powers sort of working to their own advantage outside of the multilateral system. And you've already seen some statements back home from Trump to Xi to Putin that already start to show that they're acting sort of in their interests and maybe even blaming other countries a little bit for their role.
And just on that, I mean, I guess the talks were almost hampered by this US-China standoff over the responsibility for the pandemic. I guess quite unhelpful, would you think, during this time, Jason, when the world's trying to come together?
Yes, it is. And I mean, there surely would be a domestic audience for those things. The U.S. is in an election year. But what's interesting this week, Danica, is that sort of in the beginning of the week, President Trump was using this term, the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus. And then the G7, which is led by the United States this year, put out in their draft statement calling it the Wuhan virus, which the other G7 nations would not sign. So they actually did not have a cohesive statement at the end of the G7. But by Friday, President Trump tweeted after a call with President Xi that he had much respect for what President Xi has been doing and called it the coronavirus in that tweet. So maybe he's already backed off of that, or we'll see what next week holds. But it does have that looking out for those little pieces that could show that the competition between great powers still continues, and also people looking past the coronavirus to see how blame is going to be cast.
Overall, Jason, how is the US Department of Defense prepared or preparing for this pandemic?
Right. So my old office there, the Pentagon, literally the biggest bureaucracy in the world, right, with a several $100 billion budget, has to be able to do several things at once. So it will still continue to have policy and operations and all the things that it normally would, but obviously the global and the national priority is trying to support recovery from the coronavirus. So what you're seeing is even yesterday, President Trump signed an order that allows reservists like me, I'm not a medical professional, so it wouldn't be me, being called up to active duty, up to 1 million of them for the next 2 years. And those would mainly be defined as medical profession and medical experts. However, there's a problem there because many of them are civilian medical experts as well. So the Pentagon has to walk a fine line to calling up reservists to find out if they might actually be pulling people from civilian areas and actually removing them from there. So there should be a caveat for that. You're also seeing the two hospital ships that will usually go abroad for disaster response are going to Los Angeles and New York. Each of them has 1,000 beds. So there is some preparedness there, as well as about 5 million masks that I've heard, as well as ventilators being put out to the states. But on the other hand, the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, they are specialists in trauma care, as you can imagine, and they really aren't outfitted for communicable diseases. So what you'll see is their role would primarily be try to take most of the weight or some of the weight off of the traditional cases that might occur in a hospital, and then let the experts in communicable diseases handle the coronavirus patients. So there are limitations to this as well. And then finally, I'll say that President Trump, we said last week, did sign the Defense Production Act, which allows him to order businesses in the name of national defense to manufacture. So for the first time, just this weekend, he did order General Motors to manufacture ventilators. So we are seeing that go into effect as well.
And Jason, just finally, in the midst of this pandemic, amidst everything that's going on at the moment, the US has indicted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Right. Would you say that now there's more uncertainty over Venezuela's political crisis?
Yes, well, there might be more uncertainty, but this is a very deliberate and certain action. This is a reminder, we said previously, Danica, that any one of these things would be the front page news at any other time. So we're watching out for these things. But this is a $15 million reward that the U.S. State Department put out against a foreign head of state for his arrest. So, of course, he will never likely see a day in court because I'm sure his travel will now be restricted to countries that don't have an extradition treaty with the United States. But what they're saying is that he has overseen a support for the Colombian FARC and others that have put a huge amount of cocaine into the U.S. as a narco-terrorist act. So it's kind of an escalation above sanctions of what they've been saying against President Maduro. And of course, with it happening in this backdrop, it does add some more uncertainty, as you said, to the political situation between the U.S. and Venezuela. So we have to continue to look out for these things.
An interesting world we live in. Jason Israel, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.